welcome to the Growing People podcast. My name is John Losey, and I'm excited to be here with an old friend, and it goes back a long, long time, but we haven't talked in a long while. But the adventures of Tim Walther have made up a good part of how I observe. Since my knees don't bend anymore, I have to live vicariously through the adventures of Tim. And man, he's done a lot of things, and he's gone a lot of places. But importantly, he has been focused on using experience intentionally, both in his life and in his business. So, Tim, thank you for being here and spending a few minutes with us.
Absolutely. Thanks, John. It's great to reconnect with you. Great to be here, and excited to be, sharing and talking with you.
Yeah, and I'm looking forward to filling in the gaps from the things that I've seen posted on social media, and I really appreciate every year you send out a guide of the things that you're thinking about at the beginning of the year. It's great stuff. But let's just step back and tell me a little bit about how you got into the experiential and adventure approach to learning.
Yeah, well, first there were the dinosaurs, and no.
They were my friends too, my friend.
Yeah. So I guess I'll skip to my undergraduate studies at Ithaca College, and when I was starting to realize what I wanted to focus on, I started narrowing in on psychology and business. Those were the two main focus areas that I felt drawn to. And so my degree that I studied at Ithaca College was applied business psychology. And it's a combination of psychology and business and corporate communications studies. And I was really kind of fascinated with why people did the things they do, what motivated people at work, and how business, just works. Like, how did corporations function? How do people get things done? All that sort of stuff, like the people functioning behind businesses. So that was really what fascinated me. And when I was going to college, I came out to visit my brother out in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, which I still live here now today. And I started expanding my world into various different realms in the outdoor world, and particularly in climbing and mountaineering. My brother brought me up a climb of Mount Moran, the CMC classic route on Mount Moran up the east face of Mount Moran, one of the big mountain routes in the Tetons, and had one of those epiphany moments, and was just like, wow, this is pretty amazing. So I had that combination of studying. I was kind of started getting introduced to the outdoor adventure, to climbing and some river sports, some rafting and things like that. And then I went back with this kind of excited sort of idea about, how I could combine adventure with what I was studying in psychology and business. And a college professor gave me an article titled Corporate Adventure Training, written by Todd Miner. I don't know if you're familiar with this article, but it was written in the early 90s. And, the opening paragraph of the whole article is, talks about the metaphors of two people canoeing across a lake and working together, and how that parallels how people work together in business. If people are paddling together simultaneously, you're going to get a lot more fluid forward movement, the communication, all that sort of stuff. And I didn't even realize that in industry like experiential training and development or corporate adventure training even existed. And so I saw this article, it piqued my interest, and I decided to start exploring that industry and just that type of work in more depth. And so that was kind of the foundation of it. Ultimately, that led me to finishing my degree, started climbing more, and deciding to go back and study specifically experiential education. And so I went to Mankato State University, studied with Jasper and the organizational development guru at the time, Bob Vanderwelt, and started getting more into the theory of experiential education. I positioned my master's degree through another organization in Jackson that my brother and I started a company with. We actually got them to agree to a proposal that included them paying for our graduate school as part of running the company. If we hit a certain target budget, then they would pay for our graduate school. So that worked out. And so while we were running this adventure-based recreation program for people with disabilities called Frontiers through a local organization here in Jackson, I went and studied experiential education and ultimately wrote my thesis, was my business plan for Grand Dynamics. And kind of that's the short, long intro.
Well, no, but that's what's interesting is that you took the path of business psychology behavior org first, and then got into the experiential part of it, the adventure part of it, as as a follow up. Whereas a lot of people who go the route is it's experiential challenge course first, and then they try and figure out how it fits to corporate. And my path was similar, only about education first, and then figuring out, this whole experience thing really works best if you want what you're teaching and the skills that you're providing to stick. It's just the best route.
Right. Yeah, I mean, it was really challenging at the beginning because I was 26 years old when I started my business, and there was a lot that I didn't know, and I had a lot of fears around being young and not knowing enough about what I was talking about. Frankly, even though I had the educational background, there was all sorts of objections that corporate clients had and things of this nature. So
tell me about some of the resistance while you're on that topic. What was some of the resistance you faced as a young person working into the field with the educational chops, but not necessarily, what was the resistance to you?
Well, I think the biggest resistance was my age. And, when you walk into a corporation and you're proposing some sort of educational performance enhancement training development program, you have to prove your worth. And it wasn't because I have the gray hair that I have now. It was because I was so committed to being the smartest person in the room, the most educated person in the room, of the current most important organizational development trends, the hottest business books. You could have any topic in Harvard Business Review, and I could immediately have a conversation about what was in that magazine that month, and what was this business book, and what this model was, and what this sort of thing was. And I would literally, as part of my routine, I read ferociously, books after books after books. And at that time, I decided that, youth is power. I had this belief system that youth brings creativity and perspective, versus ignorance and the lack of experience. And so I had to change these belief systems that allowed me to be somewhat confident in walking into a room and saying, you know what, I'm going to provide you with something of value, and here's why. Let's have this conversation. Let me talk about this experience. And I also had another fundamental belief system that I created, which was I didn't have to have the right answers. I just had to have the right questions. And so it wasn't me pretending to understand another person's business in the detail and how they operated, but my job was to facilitate and to get them to draw out those answers and the processes, and I did my research. I wouldn't go into a client without having researched the person I was meeting with, the organization, some of their key buzzwords, some of their language, some of the key questions that I need to have going into that initial first impression, so I could build rapport with those people. And so, yeah, that's a little bit of it.
Yeah. And I totally think that the perspective about the right questions, and I think I've been accused of trying to be the smartest person in the room, and that's not the path. It's having the humility to walk in as a beginner for that company and saying, I want to learn more. I've done my homework, but the questions that I ask are going to be informing all that. And pretty soon you can spout all the models you want. I love models.
Right.
But there's Henry Nouwen has a quote in one of his books where he talks about, you can go in there and quote people and say, so-and-so says this and so-and-so is that. But pretty soon somebody's going to say, yeah, but what do you say?
Sure.
And
Right.
I love that perspective that you're stepping in there as the questions are important, but it's all about learning all you can about that organization so that you're speaking their language and you can provide them the service that they want, not the way you can deliver.
Yeah, I mean, and when you read a lot of different books and you watch, and nowadays, you watch a bunch of different videos, you listen to podcasts, you begin to educate yourself on how to ask better questions, and you begin to understand how different thought leaders, approach different challenges different. And when you step into a client engagement, your ability to build rapport is one of the most important things, because you have to establish some trust with the client as a foundation when you're working with someone, right? People have to understand that you have the best interests at heart, that you're knowledgeable, that you're going to deliver, on the type of experience that you're going to create for someone, in a safe, professional manner, that people are going to be really happy about. So
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, and if you got to that place where you're in the room talking about your programs, it's yours to lose.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to get your thoughts on how you get into the room. But when you step in there, how do you've got through the gatekeeper? That's the role I played internally for a corporation for quite a while. You got
Right.
through me. What do you bring? What's that conversation like? Give me some thoughts about how you've prepared and really what your intention is for that conversation.
Well, it depends on the context, I think, of how you got the lead, or you had the guy, how you got that meeting in the first place, for sure. So, you know, organizations have different approaches to experiential training and development, right? So some of them are event based, some of them are more internal long-term training. Sometimes you're working with an internal OD person that they want to add an experiential component to the trainings that they're offering. Sometimes it's a big global leadership meeting and you're the person that's bringing concept to life, or doing something to reinforce corporate values or something of that nature. And so depending on how you get the meeting in the first place, the easiest way is to build rapport with someone who has clout or has some influence in the C-suite. So um, if you can build rapport with the CEO, the CFO, or anyone that's in top in the organization, that's the number one best way, because you really kind of get a pulse of what they want to have happen and what they're seeing from a higher level, so that you can support their messaging, their desires and whatnot. And so it really, almost most importantly, it comes down to who's your audience. So if you're the gatekeeper, you have one person that has given you approval in some form or fashion, right? And so it's kind of a building, it's a kind of a staged approach, right? So you have, once you get past the gatekeeper, well, I might even reference having a conversation and what I learned from the gatekeeper. And if I've used that initial, the director of first impressions or whoever that person is that says, hey, I think you should talk to this guy, then that conversation, you build off that conversation that you had there, and then you basically take the next step to really seek to understand first. I mean, that's the first and foremost part of any effective sort of discovery process, is doing that. And it's important to know who you're talking to, because people have different perspectives, obviously, on what needs to happen. You may be talking to a meeting planner, you may be talking to an external meeting planner or an internal meeting planner, or you may be talking to a training and development person, or you may be talking to an executive. These are all different perspectives on what they think an event or a training program should offer to participants. The meeting planner wants to make sure that it's a safe, professional, everyone at the end of the event is going to say that was great. The executive wants to hear you hear their people talking about remembering the values and the lessons and driving the messaging. The internal training and development person has a different, sort of focus, and they want to get people more engaged around kind of continuous improvement and things like that. So it's just super important to know who you're talking to and to build rapport at every stage in the conversation.
Yeah. You brought up something I think is really important, which is if you talked with anybody before, like whether it's a gatekeeper or maybe it was just a manager who brought you to people's attention, not just listening to what they had to say, but help them feel listened to by bringing back, this is what I learned, or this is what so-and-so said.
Right.
We talk about, in my world, I talk about, hey, there's no such thing as ninja listening or ninja empathy. People have to feel heard and they have to feel cared about.
Yeah. Well, it's important. I mean, it's not just important verbally, right? When you get into the business of delivering a service to a corporation, you get into the world of contracting. And when you're delivering something for someone, it is really important to actually write down, this is what we heard you say, this is what we're going to be delivering. So, you don't run into, well, he said, she said after the fact, or surprises, or we didn't know you were going to do this or whatever. And if you're nervous and you're not even sure what you're going to do on the event day, well, that's a different story altogether. But
yeah.
But you know what? You want to minimize all that stuff by being proactive on the front end and being transparent, because there's nothing worse than delivering an event or an experience where the client comes back and says, well, I wasn't expecting this, or, I was expecting this. And there's that sort of window of unspoken expectations that are either met or unmet, right? And you're trying to minimize this unspoken, unmet quadrant of expectations with your clients, particularly with your clients. But that's one of the biggest things you're trying to help the internal client to do, is to kind of minimize that too. But that's a whole different topic.
Align and define expectations early and often, and check them as you're developing. That's important there. Now, tell me this. Do you ever run into clients that demand return on investment statements, ROIs, or impact statements as they are assessing whether or not to work with you? And how do you handle those conversations?
Yes, sometimes that's the case. And the way I typically approach that is wanting to understand their metrics that they use internally for other performance measures. And you got to be careful, because the whole correlation doesn't equals causation sort of idea, and all these other unknown external variables that have an impact on what it is that you're measuring. So there's, as you know very well, there's lots of different ways to measure training and development programs. For some, if you have a population like sales, for example, depending on what you're doing in regard to the training and development program, if it's a series of training programs over time, or if it's a one-time high impact event, all these different variables are going to determine whether you can really effectively evaluate something. For if you're working with an intact team versus a functional work group, what's the difference? Are these people interrelated? Are they working together? Does their jobs interrelated to each other so that they have to work together effectively? And are you measuring that effectively versus something else where it's just a group of people that are impacting the organization overall? So you got to look at all these different variables and how you're measuring something. The easiest way, is something I use, the magic statement, and it's like this training and development program was the best because blank, and getting them to complete that. And at the very least, you have the person that is the key stakeholder, the training development stakeholder, committing to an answer as to how you're going to evaluate the success of the program. There's also lots of times there's internal measurements. I mean, they'll have their participants fill out these sheets in the workshop or the training program or whatnot. And, it's important to request those in advance. Give me the tests you're going to be given to us at the end so I can ace it. I want to design my training program around how you're going to be evaluating the success of this thing. so that we're all on the same page. So those are a couple thoughts.
Well, and what I heard in all that is it's really, really complicated and hard to attach a value statement onto the types of programs that we lead because of the complexity involved.
Yeah.
And I've found that, you know what, if they believe beforehand what I'm doing for them, and I've really listened to them, and I love the idea of requesting their evaluation form beforehand, because if I'm designing my event, my training, my offering based on our talk of expectations, but if they have a standard evaluation form that they use, it may look horrible because they don't align. So knowing that.
Right. Right. It's really funny, getting that after the fact. It's like, where did this come from? Or it's like, I didn't even know this was part of the thing. So yeah, that's,
Yeah. I found, at least if they believe in what I'm doing and have bought into the program, then the ROI statement is almost unnecessary. They'll buy it. But if you're challenging you and they are finance driven, that whole investment piece, it's a hard calculation that they make. And it's really hard to isolate the impact and to monetize it with the type of stuff we do because of the complexity.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
All right, let me get some specific things for a very specific audience. We both have worked in the world of experiential education, and there are lots of people who focus on adventure programs, challenge courses, camps, education that are looking to step into offering corporate programs. So whether they're a program or a facilitator, they would really like to break into the corporate world. What advice would you have for a program or a facilitator that's seeking to start to work with corporations and businesses?
Well, I think the foundation, the first thing is get educated, and there's lots of different ways to do that. Uh, Obviously, you have mentors and role models, people in the industry who have achieved success that you're seeking to achieve. Great, very simple way to do that is, create a top 10 list of the people who you admire and would like to model after. See if you can get an informational interview with those types of people. Number two, really kind of research it. Depends on the industry. If there's particular industries that you're getting that you want to target, or the type of training and development that you want to offer, do your research. Specifically, go out and read books, watch videos, read industry reports, get all that sort of business background, right? Find out what the common challenges are in the industry. Talk to people that are actually in the industry that you're going to be working with. Some of the people that are actually in the business that you're going to be training. Find out what the common challenges are, those types of things. So the foundation of everything that you're offering really comes with being educated about what it is that you're offering. So that's the first and foremost. And I think people tend to take that a little bit lightly, and there are so many unbelievable resources that people can seek out and invest their time, because as you're doing this, obviously you're going to be just much better prepared to go in and offer something. And so there's a lot. You have the whole experiential training and development realm, like we were talking before we started on, whether it's Michael Gass or Jasper Hunt or Chits Mahali, or however you say that guy's name, Flo. But there's tons of those types of experiential education models, which if you're offering experiential education to the corporate realm, you want to be well versed in that. Obviously, that's a sort of a baseline. But then there's the other side of it is the business realm, because if you're an experiential educator, but you can't really talk to business, then you need to focus on understanding and the business speak and the elements behind that. And all the other elements around delivery and facilitation, those are obviously important as well. And depending on the construct you're doing it, are you doing this by yourself? Do you have a team of facilitators? If you have a team of facilitators you're working with, do you have that shared mental model with the team that you're working with? So all of these factors are, pretty important to consider, I think, as you're considering launching into something,
Yeah, so tell me this. You brought this up, it started it, but I'm curious as to how you see maybe a couple of the main differences between the experiential educator mindset and the corporate consultant training mindset. What are some, like maybe two or three of the main differences in mindset, do you think? Or language or?
Well, I think it's, the foundation is, the experiential educator is focused on delivering experience. The business folks are focusing on business results ultimately. And somewhere in between that sort of bridge is where you need to focus your attention and how you sort of amalgamate, or I don't even know if that's a word, but, combine those things together. So that you're not really too heavy on one side or the other, but you have this blend. So I think the process orientation versus the outcome orientation; those are two common big divides. I think having fun versus really focusing on the quality of a relationship that's built, for example. When you're as an educator, as a business person, they're asking, why are we doing this particular activity, or why are we doing this particular process or methodology? And behind the scenes, you may have thought this through, but you need to be able to communicate that in a way that is effectively understood on the front end, so that the business mind can say, this makes sense, I'm bought in. And yes, I'll suspend judgment towards the end because I believe in your process and I understand that you know what you're talking about. So it's this kind of delicate balance between those two different fields that makes for an effective delivery, I think.
Yeah. Well, and I see it, maybe you've seen it too, but there's almost a lack of respect with process-driven people thinking, oh, they're just all about results and the bottom line. And the results-driven people are kind of disrespectful or discounting all that process stuff and that touchy-feely stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I've seen really effective people who are able to be that cross-cultural spokesperson to say, you're both right, and they're both powerful, and you each can learn from each other.
Yeah, and it's kind of like, there's ways to kind of pull down from each of those different categories. So if someone's focused on improving the communication on the executive team as an outcome, well, how can you bring that down to, let's start with how we're going to improve the communication between two people on the executive team, and what's a specific model that the team can buy into that will improve the communication. So is it successful if we can change their monthly meetings to being like this to like this, and their process is improved, and all of a sudden they're talking about positive aspects first to begin create an environment of success that which leads them into a more collective open environment, those types of things. There's a whole variety of different methodologies for doing things like that, but if you can sometimes take the ultimate outcome and shrink it down, shrink the change, right, and make it so that some of the bigger business outcomes are manageable ones that can be easily seen as the parallel drawn between a process that you can invite them to pursue, then you're on the right track.
Yeah, and sometimes looking at those micro movements as that what we might call a process in the experiential world is really a series of micro results.
Mm-hmm.
And you can change your language around, say, hey, this is going to, in this next 10 minutes, the result is this. And ultimately, these are going to add up to this result that you're looking for.
Right. And your, the experience in delivering these types of events, sequencing is critical. I mean, it's absolutely critical. I mean, you can't dive into a deep trust related conversation without getting people warmed up in some form or fashion to get there beforehand. And just like, you're not going to have people rappelling off of a 150-foot cliff, as the first activity of the day. It's like, you gotta work your way up to those sorts of things. You got to look at the amount of time you have, and you got to look at, sequencing and all that sort of stuff. So it's super important because people will, check out. You'll experience a lot of resistance,
Yeah.
and if you don't do it properly.
So tell me this, what are some of the biggest pitfalls or mistakes people make, including yourself, in when you're entering into these types of consulting or program relationships? What are the big mistakes that experiential people make when stepping into corporate world?
Well, I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the world of contracting. The day of, like, handshakes and this is going to be all great. I I wish that could be the case in many levels, but contracts serve a valuable uh, they're a valuable tool and process that are important. So whether it's your liability waiver to the client contract for service, those types of things, understanding the legal aspect of the business is important. And it's not just important with your clients; it's important with the staff that you're working with, that you're all on the same page. You have professional protocols. You don't want your staff showing up and wearing Birkenstocks to deliver something outside to a corporate client or whatever the case might be. If you have a certain uh, standard that you want to put your name behind in delivering in a corporate training and development program, you have to be absolutely 100% clear on your expectations with your staff, and you have to be clear on the expectations with your client, and you have to put it in writing, and you have to get people to sign the documents before you deliver the programs or events. So, I mean, that's the first thing. And yes, I'm speaking from experience. I've gotten burned many times on, just subtle little things that had I spent the extra time to clarify something, it would have been, a lot better. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
So
and just on, I want to hear some more, but just on that fact, I think a lot of us, and again, this telling real stories here, our first contracts are with friends or acquaintances or people we have relationships with, and
yeah,
oftentimes we'll drop the, we don't have to be that specific, or we don't need a contract. We're buddies, but probably the most important people to have those contracts with are your friends, because that's how relationships are busted when you
yeah,
have different assumptions that haven't been contracted out.
right.
Having those hard conversations with your relationships and friends up front make all the difference in the world on the back end.
Yeah, absolutely. The whole expectations thing, and here we're teaching, predominantly. I mean, one of the foundations for everything that we're teaching is more effective communication, and that there's multiple different ways to look at how to do that. So that's probably the first big block that I would say. Your capacity. So running a corporate business, uh, you have a few different sort of major elements that go into doing it, right? And so the sales and marketing is a big part of it. And so if you're going to be selling your service, you have to develop that skill set, and sales and educating someone as to what you're doing, and doing it well, so that you're not some cheap car salesman. No, you're selling basically getting someone to buy and agree on time, which is our most important valuable asset. If they're going to invest people's time into what you're doing with them, it's super important to be able to effectively be able to articulate what you're going to be doing, why you're doing it, whether it's the sales meeting. I don't want to waste someone's time ever.
Yeah.
I did not, and really, I don't want to really have someone spend any money on anything. I'd never, have that approach. It's like, this is the investment, and we're both sharing this investment in time so that we can get a particular outcome. And we're on the same team. You got to align with the people that you are offering your services to, so that you feel that ultimately this person you're connecting with, and doing your best to help that person look like a rock star, be the rock star, get the results they're doing, is done through these programs that we're offering to people in the business. It's important. So understanding sales, how to build rapport, how to position your product, how to position your services, having the right price point, not selling things too cheaply, going in there and really being a value driven proposition, that element on the front end before you even get to the delivery, is critical, right? And so you have the sales part, sales and marketing, positioning yourself, using the right language for that, and then assuming you get the sale and you're delivering the programs and services, then you have the whole operations part of it, right? The staff that you have aligned that you're delivering the programs with, you have to constantly be communicating with that. You have to train and educate your staff. I mean, it's challenging on many fronts to clone yourself or to have other people working with you, but that's a super important aspect if you have other facilitators having that. So you have the right people and communicating the expectations for your staff, so you have a culture of what you're doing as an organization that is aligned with your messaging and your delivery. And the baseline for everything, if you're using any sort of adventure sort of stuff, you have to have a safe environment emotionally, physically. That we talk about that all day long, but that's an
Yeah.
experiential sort of foundation. And then ultimately, again, kind of coming back to what we've spoken to, it's like understanding the outcomes, delivering on what you're saying you do, putting it down in writing, and then following up as appropriate depending on what how you're doing that. So yeah, those are
I mean, I think one of the ones that I think my biggest challenge is the whole marketing and sales piece, not because I don't believe in my product,
yeah,
but because I guess when I was a gatekeeper, I learned that there's a lot of stuff that looks great that doesn't work. Not everything that sells works, and not everything that works sells. And in order to be successful, at least in my mind, I need to make sure that I have the integrity of both. Great services, product, programs that are matched by really, really good materials and marketing and sales that I can believe in. And that's the hard transition for myself is I'm too worried about becoming that used car salesman. And I need to get over that because I know I've got good stuff and put the
right.
same time and energy. And this is so I do some publishing and things like that. Most of the products that are out there, they don't even think about a marketing budget. So they spend all their money on creating the video or writing the book or whatever. And they don't think in terms of, oh, now that I've run out of budget, I've got to get people to believe in it as much as I do.
Right.
And so that thought process of setting aside some of your resources, make sure you're doing a damn good job on what you're making, but then make sure that people know about it.
Yeah. I mean, right. It's the baseline is if you're going to go into any sort of corporate training development, like have a plan,
Oh,
like
sure, that.
like a business plan,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
it's
So I want to wrap things up here because I've taken too much of your time already. But a couple of last questions that I'm really curious about. One is, what do you think are the top 2 or 3 competencies of really good leaders and managers?
really good leaders and managers. Well, I think, it's a great question. And, I've one of the main models that I've studied and we do training and development programs on a lot is, the EQ model, right? And so there's 5 major competencies, but out of all of them, so I'll come back to this. It depends in that leader or manager. It depends on their specific role, right? So if you have a mid-level management that's in production, that person's competency that's most important very may well be stress tolerance, for example. If you have a CEO that is leading a multi-billion-dollar organization, that person's competency very may well be to be the visionary and be able to communicate the vision and the mission in an effective way and engage and inspire the people to get those results done. So it depends on the context of the role that someone is in. To me, I've found that the most successful executives that lead top performing teams have really, really strong interpersonal skills. And so by that, I mean, they have the capacity to build rapport with their teammates in a way that they have effective listening skills. They allow people to be heard, so that they're listening, and they may or may not, take that information and execute on it. But when people feel heard, they're going to be more engaged. They're going to offer up more. And those executives have this capacity to make decisive decisions in a way that that really kind of showcases effective leadership. So you want to have people be heard. You want to inspire people to bring out their best so that they're going to be more engaged. And ultimately, you got to be decisive as a top business leader so that people see confidence and they see movement and they see forward movement in their business operations. So
Yeah, and I heard it several times throughout our conversation, the importance of listening and helping people feel heard. Honestly, every single person I've interviewed in a leadership position and asked that question, listening was in the top three. So,
yeah.
next question. Tell me this: what is in the past few years?
Mm-hmm.
What book have you gifted most? Or let me rephrase that. What resource have you given away most? It could be a book. It could be.
In the past, well, I can tell you the most recent one that I've gifted the most. I gave around 200 copies out. The Obstacle is the Way. Now, this is a book on philosophy around overcoming obstacles, and I've been in particular for various different personal and business reasons as well. Been more intrigued by kind of stoicism, kind of the original, the book, the foundation behind The Obstacle is the Way, the book Meditations, which is a very, very widely sort of read by top business leaders and just political leaders. Meditations, written by Marcus Aurelius, one of the foundation sort of Stoics. He so I like philosophy. That's so right, the time will start turning trials into triumphs, and it's like it's the quote by Marcus Aurelius in there is really telling, and it basically, the essence of it is the thing that is in front of you becomes the way, because that's the thing that leads you to greatness, right? And so the challenges that are in front of you, whether you lose that sale, whether you're not sure how you're going to manage your budget, well, all these different things allow you to be to dive deep and to figure out how to be grow and develop as a person so that you can overcome these things in front of you. And so I just, it's a good reminder, whether you're going through personal difficulties, business difficulties. And, I've shared that with some top business executives, and it's very, very well received. So that's one.
Yeah. My latest giveaway is very along the same lines. It's a book called Resilience,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of, what's interesting about, I think, about stoicism and resilience and things like that, is that it is an ancient concept that social science is just now catching up with the idea of the growth mindset, all that. To me, the social science research is pointing to the power of a growth mindset, whereas stoicism and resilience are all classical thoughts and philosophies that hit the same thing. So
Yeah.
I've enjoyed that one. How about this? Do you have any apps or programs that you lean on to help you be more effective and efficient?
Well, there's lots of different program management type of software. Asana, if it depends on your context. If you're working with a bunch of different people,
What's you though? This is just what do you lean on?
for me personally,
Yeah,
um,
Evernote or things like that.
I use. It's funny, man. I still have a whiteboard in my office. The
Huh.
first thing, honestly, yeah, I'll transfer that stuff into Asana, assign tasks, and we use.
Mhm.
I mean, I have, there's lots of different project management types of, but my number one most effective tool in my office is a whiteboard.
That's,
And
if you look back behind me, I made sure that when I built my office, there's
yeah,
the whole back wall for the most part is a glass board.
yeah, I mean, I use something called the 7 most important things. And this is when I begin my day, I, uh, I, I have the whiteboard, and it's like, these are the most important things for me to accomplish today. And having it visual, articulating that. Those it allows me to focus in and kind of visually just you know
Mm-hmm.
start proactively versus sitting down and checking your email and hoping there's something going to be interesting. And email is someone else's
Yeah.
urgent needs for your time. So you hear all sorts of things about all the distractions, but like turning off all your notifications on your
Amen, brother. Amen.
just like get rid of the Facebook notifications, get rid of your, any notifications that are going to be coming into your computer or your phone that are going to distract you from whatever it is that you're doing, making it more difficult. If you don't want to be checking your Facebook account, multiple times a day, make it buried in your phone. So you actually have to go to get the thing. It's not on your first screen or whatever, it's like those types of things I think are important. And when it comes out of this, this other favorite book I'll give you, share with you, it's called Switch: How to Change Things When Change is Hard. Great book, but you have basically three major parts of sort of your psychological ability to change things. And it's your cognition and your intellect, your emotions, and your structure and your environment. And so when you're looking at creating an effective change process in your life or in your business or in someone else's business, all these things often get confused. And if you're trying to change something in your life, whether it's being more efficient or being more productive or being more fit or having a physical outcome or challenge or something like this, then you got to have the emotional reason to do it. You have to have the intellectual clarity as to what you're going to be doing to take action. And you got to make your structure and your environment easy. You want to stop drinking more, don't have booze in the house. You want to start running more, put your running shoes by the bed of your, the foot of your bed. You want to start eating, eating more healthy, then, shop at the same place, get the same things, have your list when you're going in there. And, these are all things that lead to overall sort of personal productivity. And in the challenge of getting into, a lot of times when people get into the corporate realm or whatever, if you're a solo entrepreneur, you have a small team of people, you have to effectively manage your time so that you're efficient. I mean, being in the experiential education industry, no one really wants to be in an office working, doing all the administrative stuff. We want to be out there delivering the programs and doing all the fun stuff and being a creative artist, right? But when you are working, make your work time efficient, get the things done that you need to get done, and have a healthy, balanced life so you can be a model for other executives in leading an effective life themselves,
Yeah. And, this is something in being a, entrepreneur and a small business, and I've started nonprofits, you've got to realize to set aside time. If you want to do your business, you have to spend time working on your business.
Right.
And it's an ongoing thing. That's something that, especially early on, you can't farm out. Down the road, if you build a large organization around you, then you can farm out some of the things that you don't like. But ultimately, you've got to have your hand on the pulse of how your business is operating so that you can do the stuff that you love.
Yeah. So. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, running the business, that's a whole different skill set,
Yeah,
for sure. Yep.
So I want to wrap things up here. Thank you for offering and giving me this time. I've totally enjoyed our conversation. I'm looking forward to having more conversations with you. There's so much that I think your perspective brings to what I'm doing and what other people, not only in experiential world, but people who want to service corporates and business people the best way possible. I think what you're doing with Grand Dynamics is great. So thank you, Tim.
Awesome. Very much a pleasure, John. Thank you.